The Human Rights and Equity Commission for February 28th, 2024 hybrid meeting is called to order at 4:31 p.m. I want to give you a reminder that throughout the meeting, please announce your name before making any comments. This helps people with low vision or those who are blind know who is speaking, and those where speakers' pictures and names do not appear on their monitors. Also helps take notes. We will begin with a roll call of the commissioners and encourage each member to provide a self-description. I'm going to talk just for a second about what a self-description is that we're looking for and why it's important. A self-description gives us information about the individual for non-blind people to take in visually, and when done by everyone at the meeting, provides blind or visually impaired people present a sense of diversity for those who are speaking on the panel or in the room generally. This gives them access, everybody access to about the people who are present in a room, and it means providing an equitable experience for everyone. This is a practice that we use in our COBAC, the City of Bend Accessibility Advisory Committee meetings, and we at HREC would like to join in that progress in that practice and invite others to use this practice as a model. So I will start us off with a roll call and a little self-description for me. My name is Linda Long. I am a member of the Curly Headed Girls Club. I am wearing a green sweater today and little green dove earrings, symboling peace. So I am here, obviously. Cameron Fisher.
Hi, here. Cameron Fisher, she, her, green sweater, wavy kind of auburn hair.
Okay, thank you so much. Carolyn?
Interesting. Okay. Carolyn Peacock Biggs. I am wearing pink glasses and probably paper sack brown in color. Be her.
Okay. And Jasmine.
She's online.
Jasmine?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Jasmine Wilder and I am present. However, I don't have my video on, so I have no descriptors at this time.
If you could just provide, give us some sort of sense of what you look like so we can have sort of a picture. Okay. Jeff Kitchens?
Present, he, him, male, short hair, white button down shirt.
Okay. Christopher?
Present, he, him. I'm a brown-skinned man with brown hair, and I am home. Thank you.
And Jackie?
Present Jackie, she's a long brown hair and long earrings.
Which are very pretty, actually. Okay. Nancy Stevens?
She's absent.
She's absent. I'm sorry. And Chair Manoj Alapuria is absent, excused. Also, Carly Colgan is absent and excused. And by the way, I am she, her. So we will move on to the land acknowledgement. If I had any volunteers, that would be great to read the English one. I'll read the one in Spanish. Volunteers? Jeff, you're closest to me. Okay, you. Oh, you did.
I'll do it again.
I'll do it if you don't mind.
There we
Cameron?
go.
That's awesome. Thank
Share
you.
it out.
Okay, Cameron Fisher, she, her. We would like to acknowledge that the beautiful land known as Bend, Oregon, north of the Columbia River, is the original homeland of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. The Confederated Tribes ceded this land in the Treaty of 1855 while retaining regular and customary hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. The Wanalama, Warm Springs, Wasco, and Northern Paiute people inhabit this area in certain seasonal times that clearly establish their presence. It is also important to note that the Klamath Trail ran north through this region to the Great Celilo Falls trading grounds. This trade route expanded the impact of commerce between tribal nations. We acknowledge and thank the original stewards of this land. It is our hope that guests continue to honor and care for this land.
Thank you so much. I will read the one in Spanish. Native speakers, please forgive me for my double R's. I'm still working on them. Queremos reconocer que las tierras bellas que ahora se llaman Bend, Oregon, al norte del río Columbia, son las tierras originarias de las tribus confederadas de Warm Springs. Las tribus confederadas se cedieron estas tierras en el Tratado de 1855, conservando derechos de cacería, pesca y recogida regulares y habituales. Los pueblos Wanalama, Warm Springs, Wasco y Paiute norteño habitaron esta área durante ciertas temporadas y claramente establecieron su presencia. También es importante notar que el sendero Klamath recorría al norte de esta región hasta los campos de comercio en Celilo Falls. Esta ruta de intercambio expandió el impacto de comercio entre naciones tribales. Reconocemos y agradecemos a los guardianes originales de estas tierras. Es nuestro deseo que continuemos honrando y cuidándolas. Okay, so now we have minutes approval, and we would like to approve the January 31, 2024 minutes if there are no corrections. So motion to approve the January 31st, 2024 draft minutes. Can I get a second or motion to approve, first of all?
A motion to approve.
Okay, and a second?
Seconded.
All right. Approval of the January 31, 24 draft minutes from the rest of the commissioners, which we have. Announce who motioned to approve, which was Jeff. Jasmine seconded, and the motion is unanimously approved. And so now we will have an opportunity to hear public comment, if there are any.
There are no attendees and there's no one in chambers, so no.
Okay. So we welcome and turn it over to the City of Bend Assistant City Attorney Ian Lighthouser, who will be presenting on city structure and organizing to help us, the commissioners, understand our role, the scope of HREC's work, and the structure of the City of Bend.
Oh, and Linda, Ian, I'm so sorry. If we just could have one scheduling update, Counselor Megan Perkins is going to provide an update for us. Sorry to make you go sit back down, Ian. We'll have you open just a moment. Just due to scheduling, we had to rearrange the agenda at the last minute. My apologies for that, and apologies, Ian.
Yes, I'm gonna have to go virtual, so thought it'd be best to, while I'm here, do the in-person thing. Megan Perkins, she, her, Bend City Councilor. I am wearing a blazer and have long blonde hair. Wanted to just first talk about some highlights of our last meeting, which was last Wednesday. One of the neat things that we got to do last Wednesday was look at some initial designs for the Hawthorne Bridge. For those of you who don't know, we were able to get funding for a pedestrian and bike bridge that is going to be a true connector between the east and the west side of Bend. And we got to look at some initial designs. And the idea is that ODOT has to actually build the bridge, but we wanted to make sure that it's as fully baked as possible with designs that the community really wants and likes and wants to see. So we started with some initial favorites, and then it's going to go to the community, and the community is going to get to take a look at it and say what they would like to see out of this bridge as well. So that was something that you don't get to do every day, which is help design a bridge. So that was really neat. And then we also talked a little bit more about the transportation SDCs. I know that you had a presentation back in December, I think it was, on transportation SDCs, and it was sort of the next step in the process and where they've been. There were some people, particularly on the non-residential SDCs, that had some questions about how it was going to work and the added cost to them. And so we decided to, do a phase-in approach in order to make sure that, there was no businesses that were unduly affected. And then the last highlight from the last meeting that is we approved the affordable housing recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee. And for those of you who don't know, the Affordable Housing Fund is a fee that's assessed. It's 1/3 of 1% on building permits, and it was actually we are the first city in Oregon to have an affordable housing fee. And this year, obviously the fee changes year by year. This year it was about $1.5 million that they were able to award. Of course, the amount that's requested is always significantly more than the amount that's awarded. They had 5 projects that went before them, and they awarded to 3. One of them was a rental product, and the other 2 were down payment assistance for home ownership projects. So I like the fact that it's both rental and home ownership. And then looking forward at our next meeting, a couple things of interest. One is that we're going to be doing the memorandum of an understanding with Warm Springs. And what I would like to do is make sure that is before that you get a chance to look at that before the meeting. It's going to be at our next meeting, at the business meeting at 7 p.m. And which is March 6th, so next Wednesday. And wanted to make sure that you got a chance to look at that and that you had a chance to be present or to listen in if you were able. And I think that's the only other thing that from the next meeting that I wanted to focus on. We've been having this week transportation utility fee listening sessions. And this is a fee that we are talking about to help us with the operations and maintenance of our roads. And we had one earlier, and we have one again tomorrow, and we're going to be sort of talking about what we heard at these listening sessions, and if there's any things that we need to tweak on the utility fee. The idea is that this fee would start to take effect in July, and would be a 3-year process of phasing into the full amount, and then with each year, sort of looking at getting better and better data to do it better with each year. Right now, we have very limited data about, particularly from the business side, about how we can assess this fee. So that will also be talked about at our meeting next Wednesday. I think if there's any questions or anything I can answer. Yeah.
Can you give some details about the MOU with Warm Springs?
Yeah. No, do you
want me to-
mind? Yeah.
Yeah.
The mayor's been
Sure.
most involved with this. so
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Melanie Keebler, Mayor of Bend, she, her. Where I've got also a member of the Curly Hair Girls Club, wearing glasses, light-skinned with a tan blazer on. Yeah, so it's actually really exciting. This is the first time this kind of intergovernmental understanding memorandum has happened. I don't know of any other Central Oregon city that's doing this work yet with the tribes. So we had an initial joint meeting last year, and part of that joint meeting was committing to getting this memorandum of understanding together. It's not super complicated, but it is pretty poignant in that it says our staffs will meet to consult at least a couple of times a year, and that there will be at least a couple of meetings between our governmental bodies a couple of times a year to continue to talk about shared issues of concern. Just one example being, for instance, water, which came up at our joint meeting. So it's the first step of what we hope to be many future steps of working better with our tribes on whose land, as we acknowledge today, we are on. So I'm really excited about it, and I would love to have you all they've already voted the tribal council's already voted to sign on to it. So we're doing the next step of our sign on next week and love to share it with you. Invite you to come to that meeting and check that out. And then, of course, attend future joint meetings as those occur as well if you're interested. But I'm very happy that it's moving forward. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mayor. And now it's Ian's turn.
Hi, everybody. Ian Lighthizer, he, him. I look like a lawyer who lives in Bend, Oregon. And then I am
Entirely
I am
true.
wearing today and a lot of days, a light blue shirt with a collar and a kind of gray puffy vest. I will say this gray puffy vest I've had since the late 90s, so it's not like every other gray puffy vest. But that's me. And Cassandra either volunteered or helped to run some slides because I've got a laptop that likes to run out of battery unpredictably. So she's gonna run the slides. This is a great place to start. And first, let me talk about sort of who I am and why I do this. I'm one of 5 lawyers in the city attorney's office. We are the city's in-house law firm. We provide a full range of legal advice and services to the city that can mean elected officials like the now one that's in the room, the mayor, the city council, city manager, department directors, but not just those people. Rank and file city staff, we work with them too because the city, any city operates in a really complex legal framework. And that includes all of the things outside the city that influence how we have to make decisions. And it also includes the structures that we set up for how we make decisions. So I'm going to talk about both of those things today. And I put and let me apologize sort of in advance. This is going to be a whole bunch of slides with text on them. Not really the best way to present information sometimes, but honestly, this is kind of how lawyers do it. I probably need to get better. So we'll try not to make them too dense, but it's not going to be super jazzy. And this is a version of presentation that I've started giving not just for HREC, but for some of our other advisory bodies in the city and also for city employees, because what I have found and others have found is people come into the organization, whether they're volunteers or elected officials or new employees, they may not have experience in government before, or if they did, maybe it was for a different governmental organization. And the ins and outs about how what this is, I'm waving my hands, this thing that is the city, what this is and how it works, they're not really intuitive. And there's really no reason for anybody to understand it unless you're forced, like I think all of you are, for the next 45 minutes or so to learn about it. So this is a version of a presentation I've been giving for other boards, some city employees, and sort of realized we haven't really done this for HREC. And I think the last time that the HREC had a sort of an introduction, what is the city or what is a city and how does it work, was probably close in time to when the HREC was first stood up. And that is a relatively long time ago with a lot of different folks. So seemed like a good time to do it. What I would like to do today is to impart to all of you at least a basic understanding of the structure and functions of the organization so you can understand it as you do your work. And that includes understanding at least, and not necessarily agreeing with, but understanding how decisions get made, who makes them, why, what some of the authorities are, what some of the limitations are, and have a little bit of an understanding about what cities do, don't do, and in some cases can't do because some higher authority like a state or a federal government has said, we're going to do this, you little cities stay out of it. So next slide, we'll dive right in. There we go. Okay, so some basics, and I'm actually going to get my slides up so I don't give myself a neck injury looking to the side too much. So Oregon is what's called a home rule state for cities. It hasn't always been that way. For the last 100+ years or so, it has been. And what that essentially means is that the state constitution, we think about the federal constitution, states have them too. So the Oregon Constitution has provisions in it that essentially say cities have authority, and voters in cities have authority to choose their form of government, to make local laws, to decide how they do things within certain limits. It wasn't always the case, but since 1906 amendments to the state constitution, that has been the case. Interestingly, the city of Bend, and this is not on the slide, I believe was incorporated in 1905. So for almost all of Bend's existence, Bend has had the ability to have what's called a home rule charter that essentially says all powers that a city can exercise, we reserve to ourselves to exercise if we need to. So what that essentially means is home rule cities like Bend, and there are 241 cities in Oregon, which is a staggering number. But there are 241 cities in Oregon. To my knowledge, they all have all powers charters similar to Bend's that essentially say, we as a city, we can regulate, we can make law, we can do stuff unless someone, and usually that's a state or federal government, has said, no, we're reserving the authority to do this. So that charter that expresses those powers is effectively the city's constitution. And what does that mean? How does that play out in real life? And the reason I'm getting into this is because people expect cities to do things. You know, people write to cities, people talk to people who get elected to city positions, or people talk to people who work for cities and say, why aren't you doing this? You know, do more of this, do less of that, all the time. Totally normal. But the answers are sometimes, we can't, or, well, we can, but there are limits. That can be, I think, a little bit frustrating to people, but there are usually reasons behind that. And it's this idea of preemption. And that's this concept that cities can regulate in an area unless somebody says they can't. So I want to go through real quickly some of the areas, and this is going to be a list. Yes. Yeah.
We're not trying to write too much. Can we get a copy of the slide?
Happy to share slides if, be careful what you ask for, but yes, you'll get this.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. So in Oregon, cities are preempted from taxing, meaning we cannot tax insurance providers, animal racing, real property transfers, cigarettes, alcoholic beverages, lottery tickets or lottery game retailers, real estate broker licenses, certain survivors benefits, and there are serious limitations on our ability to tax property, marijuana sales, fuel taxes. We can do fuel taxes, but there are limits. SDCs, system development charges, lodging taxes, room taxes, the hotel tax. So we can have one, and we do, but if we have one, it has to be spent in certain ways. Telecommunications carriers, people say tax all of these things all the time. And the answer is, well, we do. Or the answer is, we do, but, people say, why don't you tax this so you can fund that? It's almost never that simple, because the state has said only the state can tax these things, or the state has said a city can exercise its regulatory authority in these areas, but it has to allocate the money in a certain way, or there are caps. Other things cities can't do because the state has said cities can't do it. Cities can't establish housing sale prices, and cities can't establish rental prices for housing, and cities can't require affordable housing designations. Cities can't say, hey, you're going to have to put a certain amount of affordable housing on your property. There are circumstances where that can be negotiated, but these are things that, especially now, people come to the city of Bend and other cities all the time and say, the city needs to do this. The city needs to control this aspect of this market. The housing market is an incredibly, it's a difficult time for people who are trying to buy a house, who are trying to rent a place. And they come to the city and say, you need to do something. State has said you can't do that. You can't exercise your regulatory authority in these certain markets. Cities also can't regulate drones. We can't regulate this, and this is just silly stuff, tobacco vending machines. These are just some examples. We can't regulate vehicle code offenses. This came up a few years ago. There was a tragic accident. I shouldn't call it an accident. It was a collision where somebody lost their life in Bend. They were on a bike and they were hit by a car and they died. And there was a community group that said the city of Bend needs to make what happened clearer, so there can be some consequences for, in that case, the driver of the vehicle. And that wasn't something we can do because the state has said in the area of vehicle code, vehicle offenses, only the state can do that. So it's one example. There's a really long list. I'm going to stop reading it, but there's a list of, I'm going to say maybe 36 areas, topics, fields, subject matter that the state has essentially said only the state can regulate in this area. Cities can't do anything about it. And I'm going to say, since I've been in the city of Bend, which is since 2015, I have seen emails or had calls or discussions with people in the community about basically every single one of these areas where they've, for whatever reason, they wanted the city to regulate in one of these areas. And the answer has been, well, we can't, or sometimes it's we can, but it's not going to do the thing that you want it to do because the state has imposed some limits on how. So this is a really big deal. It defines kind of what areas a city can operate in and where it can't. So what does a city actually do? This is kind of my take on what cities in Oregon are authorized to do and kind of where they focus. And these aren't really in a particular order, but I did put regulate land use, including doing long-range planning and regulating current development up at the top, because that's a big topic in Oregon. I will say that does not mean that cities can stop growth. And this is getting a little land usey, but I'm going to get there too, because this does play into concerns about equity and housing markets and cost of living. Cities in Oregon cannot stop growth. Cities can plan for growth and are required to plan for growth. And the state says, we think this many people are going to maybe move to your city over the next 10 or 20 years. You have to figure out how to accommodate them. Housing, jobs, transportation, et cetera. So cities are required to do that. Bend cannot say, nor can any city in Oregon say, we're full, or we think we're going to stop growing, or we're going to put a moratorium on new construction or new development because we don't want Bend to change. I mean, there are extremely limited circumstances where a city can do that. And they basically require a city to say, our sewage treatment facility is going to blow up and not work because we don't have capacity in our system. And if a city does do that, it is required by the state to come up with a plan to fix that issue as soon as possible so that growth can be accommodated. So this is a big one. And I think this is really changes in Bend are in every city in Oregon are going to happen because the state has decided that change and development needs to happen in cities and not outside of cities. So this is something we have to deal with. So while the city regulates land use and does planning, it has to account for all of these things and has to happen within those kind of basic sideboards that growth and change are going to happen. With change come pressures in the urban environment. The city has a noise code. We have a sign code. We regulate public rights of way. These are things that cities do. We regulate the space, including public spaces inside the city. And there are some limits in how we do that, but we do that. We have authority to do that and probably an obligation to do it. At least I think we do. We do some limited regulation of businesses. We do some permitting. We have some operating license requirements for certain businesses, but again, there's really no central planning in the way that people sometimes think there is. Put a Costco over here or put a boba tea shop over there. Cities don't really do that. The market does that. We can do some regulation, but it's fairly light. Cities do within their authority impose and collect property tax and room tax. What that revenue gets spent on and how it could be allocated, the state has given us some rules about how that works. I mean, for room tax, the reality is the bulk of that money has to go towards tourism promotion or tourism related facilities. So if the voters in the city said we want to increase the city tax and we want to charge for that,
No, they let me said, I told them this situation. And so we got to do,
We can hear you in.
the part that I had to talk.
Thanks, Lisa.
Mute's good. Is there any way to get the closed captioning off the screen? Okay. Do you know where she is?
She was going to a kid's bathroom.
Okay, okay. Okay, the other thing we do, and this is last but not least, is cities provide core services, water, sewer, public streets and rights of way, and public safety, and that's police and fire. These are at least arguably things cities are not legally required to do, but you know, people should have water to drink and sewer systems and public safety. So these are really the core services, or the most core services that cities provide. Okay, now this is going to be dry, so I'm going to speed through it, but this really has to do with the city's legal structure. We've got three big things. We've got the charter, which I'm raising my hand up high, is way up here. That's our constitution. Under that, we have ordinances. These are laws. The city code is created and amended through ordinances. And then we have resolutions. Resolutions are really just kind of expressions. I say just, I don't mean to minimize them. Resolutions are largely expressions of the council's policy direction, policy priorities. They're not laws, but they can essentially say, here's a thing that we think is important, and it may include some action items for staff to do. So resolutions can provide direction, but they're not the law. These are really the three main ways that our legislative body, the city council, does something. And when we as staff are faced with something, or when we have questions to answer, choices to make, things to balance, we are almost always going to be looking at the charter, the city code through ordinances, and any resolutions that are in place that are relevant. These are the things we look at when we are trying to, I'll put it this way, figure out what to do or what we can do, because these are the rules and they have to be followed. The charter provisions are not optional. You know, sometimes somebody will come to the lawyers and say, what does the charter say about this? And we might look at a charter provision, and five of us might look at it and have three different ideas among us about exactly what it means in a particular situation, but it is not optional. The charter provisions have to be complied with. It's really the same for ordinances. Ordinances are city code. Now, cities do have some discretion in how they enforce their code. I mean, let's be realistic. Laws are broken every day. People speed, people don't signal out of roundabouts, people don't do all of these things. It's not really possible to catch, nor is it probably productive to catch everybody. So when I say ordinances are mandatory and have to be followed, I want to be clear. It's not possible to literally enforce every single ordinance on the spot, despite what some people might like to do. But they are the law. Ordinances are city code, and they are effectively the statutes for the city. Resolutions, again, less so. But councils can use resolutions to, again, express their priorities and direct staff to do something. You know, we resolve to do this, and we want staff to come back in 6 months and tell us how to do it. That's a not uncommon way to put a resolution together. So next slide. The charter, really quickly. This is the Constitution, and Bend's current charter was adopted in 1995. It does things, and I'm going to get into some details in a bit. It really defines the scope of the powers and kind of who has what authority within the city, including the mayor, the city manager, the municipal court judge, and the council. It is an all powers charter. As I mentioned earlier, this is the flowery language, but it essentially says, you know, we as the city, we can operate to the fullest extent possible unless there's some legal impediment at a higher level. The charter is really specific. It requires 4 votes of councilors for the council to take any action. You know, one individual council member, literally speaking, doesn't have any, or at least doesn't have much authority. It takes 4. The council is a body. It's made up of 7 individuals, but they really only have authority or have kind of the real power when they're acting together, or at least in a majority. The charter also discusses elections and qualifications. If you are ever thinking of running for city council, look at the charter, because it has some requirements in there that you must be able to satisfy if you want to not necessarily run for council, but if you actually want to be on the council, you need to meet some criteria. Charter also describes council vacancies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. Charter has provisions about how ordinances work. If somebody says, well, we want to get this thing done and it needs to be done ASAP, we, the lawyers, are often going to say, well, we need 2 readings. Let's start working back from the date you want this thing to be effective. Because we have a charter that says this is a timeline in terms of ordinances that has to be followed, generally speaking. Charter was amended. So I said the charter was adopted in 1995. That's true. It was most recently amended by the voters. Voters can amend a charter. City council can suggest, hey, voters, we want you to consider amending the charter, and we're going to refer a ballot measure to the next election for you to consider these potential charter amendments, but it is the voters that actually decide. The voters decided in the May 2018 election to amend the charter to provide for a directly elected mayor. That was not the case in Bend and had not been the case for many, many decades prior to that charter amendment. The council got elected, they came in January, and they selected the mayor among themselves. So charter was changed, and the first election for mayor in many, many decades was in November 2018, after that charter amendment was passed in May of 2018. The old charter provides, and the current charter still provides, that the council elects the mayor pro tem. So that's currently Councilor Perkins, Mayor pro tem Perkins. So we have a system where the voters choose the mayor, but the council as a whole selects one of their membership to be the mayor pro tem, which some cities would call this a vice mayor. This is somebody who is, it's kind of the right hand, or sometimes will step in for the mayor, but they share some of that responsibility. And this is a question that comes up. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you tax this? Why don't you tax that? The City of Bend Charter provides that direct sales taxes have to be approved by the voters. So that is why in 2016, there was a vote on a fuel tax at the time, and it was defeated. It did not pass. That is why if there was interest in increasing the room tax that is currently levied on hotel, Airbnb, short-term lodging stays in Bend, if there was interest in increasing the rate, that would have to go to the voters. So that's in the charter, and that has to be complied with until and unless the charter changes, and only the voters can change the charter. So these are kind of the really big high-level rules that we have to live by. I'm going to get into this. There are some slides that specifically relate to the power and authority that council has. Some of these I've already covered. I want to go to the second to last one, and apologies for the format on this one. It's a little wonky, the last bullet, but that second to last bullet point, sometimes council members resign for their own reasons. They resign before an election. And there is, almost every time that happens, there is some public consternation about the fact that the council decides on a process to take applications and interview applicants and then appoint somebody to fill the vacancy. And there are people that say, well, that stinks. We should be able to vote on it. And while I hear that, there is a reason that happens, and it's because the charter says it has to happen that way. The charter says council vacancies are filled by appointment, and that doesn't say it up there, but what that means is by the council. If the council can't get that done within 30 days of when a vacancy actually is declared and determined to exist, then it goes to the next available election. But the reason this is my way of saying, again, the reason things happen the way they do, which often frustrates people, and I understand that, I guess the point is there is a reason for it, is because the charter says that's how it's supposed to work. So there's often a method to the madness, and it's often because there's a provision in the charter or the municipal code that says it has to happen that way. So let's talk about the council's role a little bit on the next slide. Again, these are some select elements that I think are important in understanding what the council does. The council has an oversight role and a policy-making role. And oversight is a tricky word. Like, the council operates at a high level. The council is accountable to the public. In Bend, we are still small enough that the council works pretty closely with community members, elected officials at other agencies, and with city staff to figure out sort of what the priorities are and what the city should be focusing on. But these are some key things that a council does. Council has authority to approve certain contracts that are over a certain amount. Council does the biennial budget review and is ultimately responsible for adopting that budget. And that process includes a ton of public participation that's governed by state law. Council operates at a pretty high level in doing infrastructure planning and rate setting, and that includes a lot of long-term planning, again, planning to accommodate for growth and needs of a city into the future. I mean, the council has to be looking 10, 20 years down the road, like almost all the time with so much that it does. Some things the council doesn't do. Council doesn't manage or direct employees other than the city manager and isn't really involved in personnel matters outside of the city manager and the municipal court judge. City council has 2 employees. And I say that carefully because it's really the city manager, you know, having yes, the municipal court judge is appointed by the city council, but in my opinion, judges should be able to operate somewhat independently, and independent judiciary in the United States is considered a good thing. But technically the council does hire the muni court judge. But the city manager is the one employee that council has. I mean, the mayor and I can talk about things all the time. And I'll be honest, if the mayor calls, I'm calling back right away if she has a question. But technically speaking, I don't have an employment relationship with the mayor. City manager does. I don't. So what does the city manager do? Well, the charter also speaks to the city manager. The city manager is, I mean, I say the city manager is like the CEO. They're the administrative head of city government. They're accountable to the council because the council as a body is the city manager's boss. The charter, and I pulled this out because this is, I thought, interesting language. The charter says the appointment of the city manager by the council shall be without regard to political considerations and solely upon the basis of administrative qualifications. And I think that is pretty interesting. And the reason I highlighted it is because to me, that really emphasizes the administrative and non-political role of what I would say a good city manager is. And don't get me wrong, city managers have to understand politics. They have to understand, or should understand, the politics of the community they're working in. I think that makes them more effective. But in theory and in writing, if you read the charter, a city manager is supposed to be an administrator. And it doesn't mean that their work is independent of politics, because they're bosses, the council. These are elected officials who are in politics. But city managers are supposed to be just that. They're managing, they're administrating. And there should be a responsibility, and I think in good ones, there is a responsibility and a way of doing that can be, I'd say, a little independent of politics. And I think we have that reflected in our charter. And frankly, I think cities get better service from their employees and city manager if there's a little bit of independence from the core things a city is doing and the politics of the time. Because we're not going to go back a few slides, but those core services, public safety, water, sewer, transportation, those are things the city always needs to do, regardless of which way the sort of political dial might be turning at any given point. And sort of the way it happens can change with politics, because the council comes in and they have maybe different priorities than the last council. That's how it works. But the core stuff, it always needs to happen. Clean water always needs to get to people. Streets need to be safe and effective. And so administrators that can make those things happen consistently, even when politics are changing, I think are valuable. And I think Ben's charter reflects that. Okay, next slide. So that gets in a little bit to this council manager form of government. I mean, what is it? I will say, first of all, it is the most common, over time has become the most common way for this group of people with different responsibilities, elected officials and a professional administrator, to together administrate, govern, and plan for the future of a city. And you've got the electeds who are politicians, and they come with and take on political leadership responsibilities. And again, you've got a city manager that should be an efficient administrative expert on kind of making the trains run on time and all the things that go along with that. So they combine their responsibilities and talent to hopefully make things work well. The council operates at a policy level most of the time. sets that policy direction, and is the city's legislative body. You know, we've got a state legislature, we've got the Congress in Washington. Here we've got our elected city council. They are the legislators. And if the city is going to change an ordinance or its code, staff may have ideas. I may say, we really need to clean up this section of the code because it's clunky and unworkable, and it was adopted 20 years ago and things have changed and it doesn't fit. And I or city staff can sort of work through a process and make recommendations, but the council decides whether the city code is going to change. The council, they are the legislative body. I can't change the code. Every day I see things in the city code, and I think every city attorney is the same, where they think, this could be a little better. But the council is the legislative authority and has the responsibility to consider those suggestions. City staff can't do that on their own. City manager has a lot to do. The day-to-day operational stuff is, telling you, it is a lot. I mean, the city has, I think we're closing in on 800 employees. You know, imagine somebody running the most complicated business in whatever the town is, often the largest business, and a business that can't really say no almost to any customers. You know, cities can't really turn customers away. They can say, well, we can't really do what you're asking, but as a city government, you provide all these services and you kind of have to take all comers, and you definitely have to treat people fairly and equitably. And that is really complicated. And the day-to-day operational realities of that are, they're extensive. So that's what city managers do. They lead the preparation of the budget and help guide the council through the process. Council is the ultimate authority. City managers advise council, and they have that supervisory authority over city employees. So it's a lot, but they work together to make things work. So next slide. This is where I'm going to get into, I think, and I hope, what may be a little bit more germane to this group to understand or get a handle on, you know, kind of how our advisory structure works and what you can do within it. So we've got a section in our municipal code. And again, this is an ordinance. This is sort of the city law that deals with advisory bodies, including boards, committees, and commissions. And these are rules that apply to all groups. These are not just HREC specific. And right now, there are a few more listed in the code, but right now, at least when I counted earlier this week, there are 8 currently active permanent committees. There are a few others. There's a budget committee that I didn't include because they're active during budget season. There's a committee or 2 that are on breaks, but we've got 8 that are currently active that are in the code, and HREC is one of them. So we have rules that apply to all of these groups, HREC included, but not just HREC. And they define things like the authority of the group. And generally speaking, the authority of all these groups is limited to making recommendations to council, and this is language from the code, on matters germane to that advisory body. No individual on an advisory body or an advisory body can bind the city. So similar to how the council has to operate with 4 of them have to agree to sort of exercise their power and authority. HREC as a group, a majority of you need to agree or decide on a course for the HREC to have done anything or decided not to do anything, to take in a position. To the extent that you are taking positions on things, generally speaking, and this goes for really all of our boards and committees, except for a few exceptions that are kind of rooted in state law and what that particular committee needs to do, you're generally making recommendations to the council. This provision, or this section in the code, also deals with the selection process for appointing all of you and your colleagues on other boards and committees. And it generally says, and I'm paraphrasing here, the mayor and council have discretion and can kind of do it in the way that they think makes sense in terms of interviews or not, who to interview or not, who to appoint or not. This is entirely up to them. There are some general criteria that the code says should be considered in making appointments, and they include the ability of an applicant to further the council goals, applicant's overall record of service, a goal of representation of backgrounds consistent with the skill set needed for the particular advisory body, a balance of viewpoints on the advisory body, and diversity, including representation for all of the community. And that's taken directly from the code, that language, that last bullet point. I want to make one point on the last slide, the ability of the applicant to further council goals. That, to me, emphasizes that all of our boards and committees need to be operating in a way that is mindful of what the current council goals are. The council goals change every 2 years. We have elections in November. There may be new people on council. There may not. But that new council, whether it's new people or not, in the first part of the next year comes up with their goals for the next 2 years. And that is intended to align roughly with the city's biennial budget. City of Bend does 2-year budgets. So it makes sense to the extent we can align the budget with the council goals and the goal setting process, because the goal setting that the council goes through it's a reflection of the council's, but the city's priorities at the time. You know, people run for council and say, I'm going to focus on this and this and this and emphasize this and this. If they get elected, that is a statement that these are priorities that a majority of the people voting agree with and think are important. So that goal setting process happens after they come in January, and it happens in alignment with the budget process, because goal setting and budgeting are an expression of a city's or a state's or a federal government's priorities. You know, that, I mean, if I've told people who want to run for office, not in Bend, but in other places, if you want to find out if you're interested in this, read the budget and find out what the city, the state, the county, whatever is focused on, because those are the priorities. If you're really interested in these things that aren't even in the budget and never will be, this might not be for you, because the budget describes what the entity does. So the reason I bring that up is for all of you, just be aware of what the council goals are at a given time, because that is going to be at least roughly kind of a guide for where you should be operating within. Okay, next slide. Yes, thank you. Couple of other points. These are things that are also in the code. We want people who live in the city to be on advisory bodies. You know, there are some exceptions. The code, I didn't put the language up, but it essentially says if you're applying for this, one of these positions, you really should live in the city of Bend. There are some exceptions. You know, if somebody lives in, I'll say Deschutes River Woods, they live in DRW, but they work in Bend, they're active in Bend, and they have some particular skill set to bring, or attribute or experience to bring to a certain committee. It's not out of the question that they can be appointed, but that is, the code sets that up to be the exception, not the rule. And this is important. I don't want to gloss over this first bullet. Everybody's a volunteer. And yes, there's a stipend program that we're going to hear about, or an update about a little bit later. But your volunteers, you know, you haven't been elected. And I don't mean that to downplay what you're doing, but you've been appointed by the elected officials to work within their goals. You can't bind the city. You don't have individual independent authority. It's as a group that you have power, and that power really is influence. So as you're thinking about how to go through your work, I would keep those things in mind. You know, getting the group to work together and figuring out what's important to you and how you can influence the council. I mean, I keep saying you can recommend to the council and that's it. And when I say that's it, what I'm trying to say is influence packaged with a recommendation makes a recommendation more powerful. So figure out how you can use that and work together, because that really is what the council wants you to do. And when I say you, I mean all of our advisory bodies, not just this group. Okay, next, this group, ATREC. I'm going to talk about some of the code provisions that define in a little more granular detail what the ATREC does and is supposed to do. And all of our advisory bodies that are in the code, they have some version of this. There are code provisions saying this is kind of what we want this committee to focus on. This is how we want this committee to do its work. This is what we want this committee to give us the council advice on. ATREC has that too. ATREC has a purpose statement, which not all of our advisory groups do. ATREC has it. This, I'm not going to read it. You've seen it. But when questions come up about what ATREC is doing or what it's supposed to do, I, as a lawyer, am always going to go to the code. Yes, if it's a question that implicates the charter or some other section of the code, I'll go there if I think it's relevant. But I'm going to go to this purpose statement, and then I'm going to go to these next slide where we have two bullets. And I'm going to go through these really quickly because I just want to remind you that these are there. So this is not the charter for the ATREC, but it wouldn't be inappropriate to think of it this way. These are code provisions, which are law for the city of Bend, that say what ATREC is supposed to do. Importantly, I think the second bullet, create an action plan, ATREC has done that. You know, it says the plan should be responsive, And there is a possibility, there are possibilities for updates to the plan, but this is an action item that was included in the code that ATREC has done. Thank you. So this slide, also really important in that, I'll be super frank, I think this second bullet, is one where ATREC has struggled. You know, it's kind of, how do you do this? How do we do this in the city structure? This is in the code. This is still something that ATREC should be working on, but I think this has been a challenge. And I will also tell you, I'm going to tip my hat a little bit. I didn't want this in the code because I thought this was going to be a hard thing for ATREC to do because, I have questions about how well this fits within kind of the city's capabilities, the city's resources, the city's role. So this is another discussion, and happy to answer questions, but this is something that the stakeholders at the time when the ATREC got off the ground, including council members at the time, thought this was important. The lawyers had questions about how this was going to fit with what the city does and how it does it. And I think we've seen some of that, which is okay, but I think this has been a bit of a challenge figuring out how that'll work. Yes.
So then my question would be, given the challenges of us actually being a regulatory body, which is, this is what this suggests.
It's softened, but it could be read that way. Yeah.
Yes. How does, if ATREC wanted to, use my words correctly here, wanted to advise city council with a proposal to potentially change this, how would they do that?
First thing any ATREC member who's interested in this topic should do is talk to Andres and Cassandra offline about that. You can always do that. Yeah, and then eventually, if ATREC wants to make a recommendation to council, like I said, it has to happen as a group. A majority of you have to do it, but talk to staff. I mean, any of you can always say, you can always ask me questions, and that's true. Your first points of contact, I think, should be Andres and Cassandra, depending on the issue and who's available. But yeah, you can always bounce ideas, impressions, thoughts off them, and really you should. I mean, I think some committees do a lot of that with their staff liaisons, some don't. I don't have a good sense of how much of that happens with ATREC. But yeah, if you have questions about or thoughts, yeah, talk to them. Talk to them offline. Find time. That's always the way to do it. Okay, next slide. So this is important too, because this is also from the code, and this is the last thing I'm going to go through from the code. It talks about the authority, where ATREC's authority comes from, and this is important. And I don't want this to sound too limiting, but this is in the code. ATREC may advocate to the city council when ATREC identifies issues of community significance involving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Stop there. That's great. I think that's what ATREC has done, wants to do. Most of you probably want to do that. But it says during goal setting or as otherwise scheduled by the city for advisory committees or for the ATREC. And we are talking about the ATREC code, but I want to emphasize this isn't really particular to ATREC. I mean, what it says is that goal setting process that happens every 2 years, I've talked about, where really priorities and kind of the roadmap for the next couple of years of work get set. That is the time to advocate for what needs to happen and what needs to be prioritized over the next couple of years, or when the city schedules time for advisory committees or for the ATREC to advocate to council. And that happens at these quarterly updates we do, which get really packed and don't sometimes have enough time for everyone, in my opinion. But the way ATREC advocates to council or should advocate to council is described and defined in the code. It's not really a process, but it's kind of a channeling of when and how it happens. And I will tell you, it is not different for other groups either. I mean, other groups like the council is, as the legislative authority, really is kind of saying, here's what we want you to work on. Here's what we want advice on. Here's kind of what we need your opinions on. And I don't mean to say there isn't room for people in your positions to say, what about this? But this is set up so council as the legislative body and the governing body of the city of Bend is really, they're setting the goals for the council. The budget is following that, and the rest of the work that you do and that staff does. I mean, I could come in every day and just sit down at my desk and be like, okay, what's going to land, and be really busy. But there's also a lot of other long-term project stuff that is connected to council goals and related to budgeting that I'm supposed to be working on, but often can't because the stuff that pops up is just the stuff that pops up. But you know, we, the city, we are going somewhere or intending to go somewhere on almost everything that somebody could think up or like that pops into their head about what a city is or should be doing. I mean, we don't have every base covered, but somebody in the city has probably thought about this and says, yeah, we'd like to do this by the end of this year, or we'd like to be here in 10 years. So there's a plan, and the council is kind of trying to manage all of this and come up with priorities that really influence how we do our work and what the prioritization is. So if HREC and other advisory bodies understand that, you can be more effective, because the reactive stuff that we all do, this thing happened and we've heard about it and we need to address it. There has to be some space for that, but if we can understand kind of the big picture plan, I think we can get more work done. And that comes down to council goals and the goal setting process. Okay. Where are we on time?
About 10 minutes.
Great. So I'm going to be real quick. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions, because the rest is going to be really kind of general and not really HREC or city structure related. It's just going to be some things that I want you all to kind of be aware of, because you are, like it or not, considered public officials. Yeah.
I actually do have questions.
And I think this is kind of less important than the other stuff. So if we want to spend time, go ahead.
Yeah, so I understand that we can't and don't have backroom conversations on regarding any topics or the meat of what we do in HREC without a quorum or anything like that. So, but you know, administratively, the problem we have is on HREC that I can see is that is turning work over, task turnaround. And, you know, I'll say personally that I personally have had, you know, barriers to doing that. Primarily those around remaining housed. But there are other people have different barriers. So to address this part of it, is there any sort of scaled back tool, organizational project management tool, where that we could use to basically just that doesn't involve content strictly, but can organize and manage task descriptions, deadlines, and task ownership?
So there probably are.
Well, we need one.
Yeah,
So-
and that's probably a discussion to have with our adept staff members and liaisons who aren't.
And I have
aren't
talked to
me,
Cassandra about
but-
it, but we need
Yeah.
we need a specific tools.
Yeah.
And so what
So
kind of tools could we pick? that
Yeah,
would be
two
legal?
things. I mean, there probably are, but what you, everybody in government in Oregon needs to think about is if you're a member of what's called, the law calls a governing body of a public body, which you all are. HREC is a governing body of a public body in state law, as is the Planning Commission, as is the Environment and Climate Committee, and all of our other advisory bodies. What that means is you're subject to the public meetings law, which is what you're talking about. And what that essentially means is, and this, I mean, it's kind of arcane and arguably outmoded. The law has not really caught up with some of these tools, or the fact that people use these tools to get work done, these collaborative tools that we all kind of rely on a lot in our outside of this life, probably, or have some experience with. The law on the public meetings law, at least in Oregon, hasn't really caught up with that, because what the public meetings law is designed to do is to make sure that those of you in these decision-making positions on these bodies, whether you're on the HREC or the city council, that you don't engage in the proverbial smoke-filled backroom deliberating or decision-making, or even deal-making outside of the view of the public. It's a transparency law. So the work you're doing, at least the deliberating toward a decision, and the decision itself has to happen in this setting. And that goes for like the school board and the county commission and the city council, all these groups. But so what the challenge with that is, like, is there a way to get work done and keep things moving outside of the very limited time that you're in here?
So can we go back to 1984? And the administrative processes that I used then, which I was called a secretary then,
Yeah.
but we got task list.
Yeah,
We got a task list,
I-
and when the task list was completed, we handed it in.
I think there are some ways to do this and probably develop some tools to keep things moving outside of the meeting. They're probably going to revolve around staff as kind of a hub because, and I'm oversimplifying this, but the more of you that are working together, and by that I mean trading information or communication outside of a meeting, the closer we come to violating the public meetings law. Where we don't get in trouble there because the law allows it is if you are working with staff. So if the information or the collaboration is with staff outside of a meeting, that's great. That's fine. The law doesn't prohibit it or even discourage it. What the law does prohibit and discourage is too many of you collaborating, working together outside of the venue where the public, if they want to, can see you. And again, we have all these tools, we have social media, we have actually ways for people in your positions to collaborate openly. I mean, I will say, and the law's not there yet, but if we had this publicly accessible chat group where you guys could all talk to each other and trade ideas, and somebody in Salem at the Attorney General's office is like, their ears are
Rolling
ringing out.
over in his
But
bed.
where you could all trade ideas and see it, and anybody with an internet connection to be like, oh, and they said this, and 2 days later, if they could if there was a group chat that was open to the public and the public could access it, in my opinion, that would meet the purpose of the public meetings law, right?
Okay.
But we don't have that
We
yet.
don't have that.
And
So,
what
under
what
the-
the public
sorry.
what the public does not like and what courts do not like is a bunch of people emailing each other or texting each other because the public can't see that happen in real time and saying, I think I like this or I don't like this, or make sure to bring this up. If enough of you are doing that, a quorum of you, a couple of you doing that outside of the meeting, not a big deal. I mean, I'll say again, the Attorney General's office is like something's beeping. But if like 3 of you are doing that, not a big deal. But if we start drifting towards a quorum, which I think right now is 5 or 6, that's a problem. You can't do that outside of a noticed public meeting because
Okay.
not in theory, the public has a
Okay,
right
Jeff,
to see this.
You're
Yes.
crunching your tongue. Jeff,
Okay.
what would you like to say?
Can I call on, this is Lisa. I'd like to call on Christopher. He's had his hand up for a while.
Sure, yeah.
Hi,
Christopher?
thank you, Christopher Foltz, he, him. And my question was, I'm good at engaging communities online and in social media. So if I utilize my position as a commissioner to engage with the community and identify issues of human rights and equity, is it right to do that in my position? Is it okay?
It is okay. And I would, from my opinion, encouraged. I mean, I'm not the boss of anyone, much less any of you, but yes, you can engage with people in any community, especially communities that you think are impacted or interested or relevant to or adjacent to HREC work as individuals. As you do that, or if you do that, just be cognizant that you're an individual. You're acting maybe as an individual member of the HREC. Be cognizant of the limits of your authority as an individual member of HREC, both to commit the city to anything, which, I mean, this is going to sound blunt, but you don't have any, but even to commit the HREC to anything, because as an individual HREC member, you don't have the ability to commit HREC to anything. But can you and should you be engaging with community members to understand issues, identify priorities, and maybe bring some of those concerns, thoughts, ideas back to the HREC? Absolutely. It's not a policy problem. It's not a legal problem. It's not a public meetings problem.
Okay.
Now, on that note, if you are doing things individually, engaging with community members, you're out in the community, you're doing anything related to your HREC work, if you are making any record of that, and I'm not even going to get to the rest of the presentation, I'll just cover this. If you are making a record of that because you're commenting on a Facebook post and saying, hey, I'd like to hear more about that, or hey, I've been working on this, I'm a member of the City of Bend's Human Rights and Equity Commission, or you're emailing somebody, you're texting somebody, doesn't have to be a city person, doesn't have to be a member of HREC, but if you are creating, I'll say creating content on any media, any form, your personal phone, your personal laptop, whatever it is, if it is the public's business because it's part of or related to your HREC work, chances are that's going to be considered a public record, which is fine. If it's a public record, it comes with a retention obligation, meaning you have to keep it, you can't destroy it, which is fine. And if it's a public record, it comes with a disclosure obligation if somebody asks for it, again, which is fine. So just be cognizant of that. Acting as an individual, I mean, you can say, hey, I'm a member of the City of Bend's Human Rights and Equity Commission. I'm only an individual member, but I'm interested in talking to you about this. Totally fine. Do not oversell your authority. Do not lose sight of the fact that it takes the commission as a whole to do anything or make a recommendation. And do not lose sight of the fact that the closer this content is, whatever it is, to the business of this group or the city, the more likely it is to be a public record that comes with certain obligations. Again, which is fine. Public records are not to be feared, but they're a hassle for you in that they can create retention obligations. All public records have to be retained for a certain period of time, depending on what kind of record it is. And if somebody asks for it, somebody in Tallahassee who has nothing better to do than follow City of Bend business, they've never been to Bend, and they submit a public records request to the city. And it says, I want all of Jackie Curry's texts from her personal phone that have anything to do with HREC business. We probably have to go to you and say, do you have any? And if you have any, I hope the answer is yes, I have them. And because we're gonna have to say, well, we need to see them because we might have to turn them over to this person that doesn't know anything about Ben, doesn't know anything about you, has no interest in any of this. But if they submit a public records request, we have to treat it just like any other one. So the best answer when we get one of those is no, there are no responsive records. That's a great answer. And usually not a bad answer, unless it's something we're supposed to have. And that's a way of saying if you don't create public records, you don't have anything to retain and you don't have anything to turn over. But if you do create them, you may have to do both of those things, and people can create public records on their personal devices or through their personal email addresses. It's the content of the record that makes it public, not the thing that generated it or the thing that sent it or that's stored on. So we just skipped ahead a few slides, which is great. Don't change slides, but that kind of covers public records, sort of.
So I have a question. Maybe it's probably going to be as much for Cassandra and some of the former and some of the HREC members that have been here for a while. But as I understand it, we've set some goals, we've set some priorities, we've set some directions, some things for HREC. And maybe to help me kind of understand, having only been here a year, is the direction of the work plans, the things that we're working on as a group, I understand and I can see how they tie directly to the code. My question is, do they tie also directly to the goals of the city, and were they done within that process? Were they done independently? Like, how did we sort of get to where we are today with the work that we were doing? I know we've kind of taken a pause on it for a while, but we're going to get back to it. The work that we were doing, we were having sort of small committees on equity action and such. How did that kind of interplay with all the stuff that Ian's been presenting?
May I take that question?
That's probably more you than me. But happy to.
So it essentially centered around, historically for HREC, there were 10 initiatives that HREC identified from a combination of community listening, looking at what community initiatives were, what was going on with city council at the time, that effectually created the work plan that then was presented to city council back in December of 2022, I believe. That was approved at that time, and that's what the current rendition of the work plan looks like. And the work subcommittee groups, Jeff, that you've identified, were truncated down from the original 4 finalized work plan items to become 3 groups that we've been working on and continue to do. And I believe Andres is going to touch a little bit about the future of the work plan a little bit later in the presentation. But I would say that's kind of a very short, truncated version of what has happened. But I'm happy to go offline to kind of give you documents and supplemental information to show you the flow of how we got to where we did. But it is with consideration of current initiatives which center equity and accessibility in city council goals. And it was in consideration with what community is facing currently when we're talking about marginalized groups and underrepresented priority populations within the city of Bend.
Sorry.
And that's helpful, because I know when I looked at the sort of the work plan and then the city goals, the most recent version, there was some alignment, but then there was also some differences. And so it was just trying to kind of understand based upon what Ian shared, how that aligned. That makes sense. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to end with this slide because I think we're at time, but I do want to mention a couple of things. So I'm not going to get deep into ethics, but state law governs ethics. We have a City of Bend employee handbook, which governs me, but not you and not council members. So we're going to focus on state law, and I've boiled down some concepts. And again, I'm going to end on this slide, not get into the details, but the big one to remember is none of us public officials, because we're the same here, me as a city employee or you as volunteer members of HREC, you can't take advantage of your official position. And what that means for purposes of state law is you can't get something. I mean, outside of water and cookies and your stipend, those are all fine. But you can't get something because you're on HREC, just like I can't get something because I work for the City of Bend. I don't really do this, I probably should, but if I just go to the pub and run into somebody and they want to buy me a beer, or they want to buy me a beer and I think it's because of where I work, I say no. I mean, no, you can't buy me a $7 pint. I mean, technically the law probably allows it because there's what's called a gift limit and a dollar amount, but no, I know. So same for you. And no, if I walk into the pub, I'm not like I'm taking advantage of my official position because I'm hoping somebody sees me and wants to buy me a beer, but say no. Say no. We are not supposed to get things that are available to us because of our positions, whatever they are. I'm just a average government employee, you're volunteers. I don't think anybody is coming to us to like swing billion-dollar deals or anything, but same standard should apply. Say no. That's my advice. Conflicts of interest. Oregon law recognizes them. They are not what people sometimes think. People sometimes think, I mean, this is a Bend example. Oh, this person's in my book club, or I ski with them, or they're a friend, and they're coming to the HREC or the council or some other group, and they're my friends, so I can't be involved. Like, no, that's not what state law says. State law says conflicts of interest are all about money. If you're involved in a decision that is going to have a financial impact on you or a relative, and state law defines relative, or a business with which you or a relative is associated, usually meaning you work for a business or you have an ownership interest in a business, you are generally speaking, you have to do things about that. You have to either declare the conflict, you have to announce it, and in certain cases, depending on the issues, that's enough. And in certain cases, you're out and can't participate. So I won't get into that other than to say, people are sensitive to conflicts. That's great. Conflicts of interest are not bad. They're only bad when they're not recognized. I don't need you to over focus or over recognize on conflicts, but if something is coming before the HREC that might involve, more work for the architecture firm that you work for, or more work or less work for the business that your partner works for, something like that, come to me before the meeting if you see it on the agenda, and we'll figure out how to deal with it. And usually it's just announcing it and putting it on the record, and then you're good and we go forward. So usually not a big deal. It is all about financial benefit, or as the statute says, the avoidance of financial detriment. So, but it's all about money. If there's a financial impact on your bottom line, family members' bottom line, household members' bottom line, or any business that you or those people work for or have an ownership interest in, let's talk about it. And there's a great resource of Oregon Government Ethics Commission. We call them all the time. Something comes up, we're like, this is weird. We can call staff of the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. We don't have to, we'll say who we are, but we won't say, Counselor Smith. Will say, I have an elected official who has raised this question, and we can get advice from them. Or I can say, I have a volunteer member of an advisory group that is concerned about a potential conflict. Here are the facts. What do you think? They will give us advice. And sometimes it's exactly what we expect. Sometimes it's a new wrinkle, but it's this great resource. They're a regulatory body and a resource. And I'm encouraging you to think about these things ahead of time. Look at agendas ahead of time and think, oh gosh, does this have anything to do with the company I work for? If it does, talk to me before the meeting and we can figure out what you need to do. Usually it's very simple. The reason I'm emphasizing this, and I'll end here and not to be a downer, but Every public official, me included, but including you, we're all personally responsible for compliance with the ethics law and violations of the law. So there are sanctions that the state can levy against us as individuals. And if I make an ethical boo-boo, like that's on me. I don't get to go to my employer, the city, and say, you know, pay for this, fix this. It's on me. We all have a personal obligation to adhere to these things. And that's not meant to be scary. But the reason people get in trouble with these things is either not looking ahead and thinking about them, or not asking questions of like staff or the lawyer. If you bring these things up early, we can almost always figure it out. Yes.
Just a perspective to share, having been in this world for over
Mhm.
20 years. Understanding the black and white is the financial part.
Mhm.
Perception is also the reality.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
if you have
Yep.
any thought in any
Yep.
way that there is a conflict of interest, whether or not there's a financial tie.
Yeah.
It's important to just highlight that. We can just highlight it.
Yep.
Deal with it, and not, and then it becomes a public thing.
There are times when the public official might go on the record and say, you know, I've talked to the state, and I've talked, without waiving the privilege, I've talked to the lawyer, and we all don't think this is what the law would call an actual or potential conflict, but in an abundance of caution to make sure people understand, here's the relationship or here's the issue. And almost every time people shrug their shoulders and we move on. But yeah, if you feel like something's going to pop up later, always better to put it on the record, you know, at the beginning of the meeting, or when that item comes up, say, hey, I know somebody and we were, I don't know, college roommates or something, and that's not a conflict, but I want to make sure that people understand there's a long relationship here. It's not influencing my decision of this issue, but I think it's fair for people to know. And again, almost always a shoulder shrug and we move on. Okay. Sorry to go over time.
No, thank you so much.
Yep.
Very informative, and we appreciate it. And so now we're going to turn it over to the City of Bend, Assistant City Manager and Chief Innovation Officer, Stephanie Betteridge, joins us in the second part.
This is Lisa. I'd just like to remind you to say your name before you speak.
Okay, I keep forgetting that.
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
And thank you for the reminder, Lisa, before I make sure I introduce myself. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Betteridge. I am the city's Chief Innovation Officer and one of the Assistant City Managers. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with brown hair. There's a few sparkles in there now. I'm wearing a black blazer tonight. All right, and I am excited to be here to have the second part of our conversation about advisory body stipends. You may recall from our last session, we are in the process of reviewing some inputs about the inputs and feedback about the stipend program and developing a recommendation that will go to council in a few months. So the objectives for this evening's conversation is to recap the stipend program. It's been a month since we've talked about it, so thought it would be helpful to just have a quick refresher about what the program is, when it was established, and what the objectives are. We'll also quickly remind ourselves of the survey findings, and then recap the conversation that we had as a group in January. We'll use that to develop a recommendation for any changes to the program, and then talk about how that recommendation will go to council. So a couple of quick reminders on the stipend program. As part of the council goals in 2021 to 2023, council set a goal around really expanding opportunities for community members to connect with the city and lower barriers to engagement and improve access. One actionable way that was identified to do that was to create a stipend program that would offset the cost of participating on a city advisory committee, board, or commission. And then also to implement a strategy to begin to capture data to know whether or not that stipend program is effective. The result of that council goal action was the stipend program, and that was adopted by council in 2022. It was launched in July of that year. And as part of that adoption, there was a commitment to evaluate and refine the program after the first year. That's our task ahead of us right now. The stipend program, again, was intended to offset related expenses such as internet for remote meetings, but also to do the work of the commission. parking and transportation. It was not meant to be a compensation for time. As Ian mentioned earlier in his presentation, commissioners serve as volunteers, not as city employees. And that's an important distinction that also flows into the next bullet around the amount of the stipend. So the stipend is $40 per meeting, regular and subcommittee meetings, not to exceed $5,000 or $500 annually per person, regardless of the number of committees an individual serves on. That is related to insurance. Ian provided a lot of detail on that in our last conversation, and I'm sure is happy to provide some reminders if we need any. All advisory group members are eligible, but may opt out. It's not something that's required. It's something that's available. And when the stipend program was established, it was determined to only apply to permanent committees, not to the ad hoc committees. So an example of an ad hoc committee is TRUAC, which is our current tree advisory body that is meeting to provide input into the tree code. That committee will sunset when that work is done. So that's something that we'll be considering later in today's conversation. And the program disperses the stipend amounts through cash cards that are mailed to individuals. I pulled current numbers as of today. So current participation for advisory body members is currently 75%. So 73 out of the 92 volunteers on our advisory boards are receiving the stipend. So as the first step in our evaluation process, we conducted a survey of all advisory body members. We had about 40% response rates. And there were some key takeaways from that. The first is that everyone who took the survey had heard of the stipend program. Only three knew about it before applying for a board. That is a timing issue. So we rolled out the stipend program after most of our volunteers on our advisory boards were already part of those boards. Feedback was that signing up and receiving the debit cards was seen as easy, but using them it presented some challenges just to the nature of the cards that were being distributed. The stipends were helping to offset the cost of transportation and internet. We also heard from some that it helped to offset expenses related to caring for children or for meals that you may miss if you're serving on the advisory bodies during those times. And generally, people who opted out of the stipends were still favorable. They supported the program. They just felt that they didn't need the stipend to be able to participate in it. So if you recall, about a month ago, we were sitting in this room, we had posters everywhere, we had Post-its, and all of you were sharing your thoughts and insights on a number of questions. So I've tried to capture that general discussion as a reminder. So the first question that we had asked was, is the stipend program generally meeting the objective? And the feedback and the conversation was that generally it was, but really needed some additional information and insights to know for sure. We also talked about there's a real opportunity to raise awareness about the stipend program, particularly before people apply to participate on an advisory body. And there were some great ideas discussed around how we could highlight the stipend program through the website, on the outreach materials, on the application itself, as well as in the interviews. One caveat to that was that you didn't feel that it was appropriate for people to sign up for the stipend or indicate that they'd like to take it as part of the application process, that should occur after they were selected to serve on an advisory body. Given the survey feedback around the cash cards that range from they're not very environmentally friendly because they're plastic to it's difficult to use all of the money on them because you have to use it all at once, or you have to look up what's available left on it. Also that the amount starts to be drawn down if you don't use the card. There are a number of challenges around that. You provided a lot of feedback on, should we continue to just offer the cash cards? We discussed briefly that checks are an option, but no one is currently taking advantage of that. So again, an opportunity to highlight that as an option. There was also some questions around, could we have direct deposit? Could we offer Venmo? I went back and connected with our finance team on that. Venmo is not currently an option that the city can offer, but the city can do direct deposit. So two considerations around the direct deposit and the checks. Those do require that someone fill out a W-9, which requires providing a social security number or other tax ID number. So as you think about how we might want to move forward with some alternatives, probably keeping the cash card as an option for those who don't want to provide information to the city. But maybe that we want to have more than one option there. There were also some suggestions around the frequency for the stipends. I confirmed with the city that we can make those quarterly, annually, or monthly. So another consideration for you to take into account. And then you also had made a suggestion around, could we reimburse actual cost? So that's another thing that could be considered. Some other suggestions around offsetting the cost of participating and lowering barriers was around providing equipment and supplies. Those are things that we can already do. So again, there's probably more communication around that one. That expanding the outreach, focusing on getting the word out to underrepresented communities, and then providing language and accessibility support. Again, that's something that we can offer, but probably something that we could do a better job of highlighting to prospective and current advisory body members. Is there anything that you recall from our January conversation that I didn't touch on? All right. So now we're getting to the conversation piece of our agenda item here, which really looking to the commission to provide input on a number of items around how you might want to recommend some possible adjustments to the stipend program. And just as a quick reference, you'll see in the blue box on the right side, the current stipend program is outlined there. So at a high level, it's offered to all standing advisory bodies currently, $40 a month, maximum $500 per year. Prepaid cards, and to date, we have not collected demographic or diversity data. So first question for the group, should diversity data be requested? Optionally, of course, through an annual survey. And if so, should this be coupled with stipend program questions? Again, asking for feedback on how the stipends program's going. Any thoughts? And again, this is tying to, is the program achieving the outcomes, which is lowering barriers and increasing diversity on council advisory bodies?
Should the first do that question on a personal level, I would say no. I think you lowers the end of that. And I wonder why we should do personal mention. When you sign on to represent the city's disenfranchised, that it's a separate entity to the compensation to help out with, not saying the inconvenience, but the things that you have to go through to be available for here. So,
Jackie. Yeah, I'm almost wondering if it's like a different question to be asked, like, because in some ways to actually answer the question of what the goal is, it's like, it's almost like it has to be collected, right? And so then, though, maybe the question is more around, can the program just stand as an offered stipend, period? And there's maybe hopes that that's going to prevent barriers or help offset barriers. But yeah, via all of the things, maybe that's not even what.
Cameron Fisher, she, her. Is this question, are you applying this to our view on all of these committees or just for HREC?
all committees. So remember, the stipend program is for all advisory bodies, including ATREC. So,
But you're asking for our opinion on. all,
yes, so
not just for
we,
our own.
right, we are seeking your input and recommendations on the overarching stipend program that applies to all. And I should have clarified, the reference to diversity data. That doesn't necessarily have to be demographic. That could be data that looks at renters versus homeowners. It could be looking at geographical representation of advisory body members as well. So there's an opportunity to really think about what that could look like.
And I know I think you touched on this last meeting, I was on Zoom, but is the intention to be able to have evidence for future, like, that this is successful and that you're meeting the needs of multiple members, different members who can participate, right? Is that the benefit of collecting diversity data?
Yeah, so the benefit is to measure from sort of the baseline. So say the first year that we gather the data, and then from there, from out, has the diversity of our council advisory body members increased? And is that due in part to the stipend program, which has the primary objective of lowering barriers to participation, but also increasing the diversity of representation.
So is that necessary to keep the program going?
That's a great question. And I think that's why we're having this conversation around this. Having data, and I think keeping in mind that it can be optional. It's not something that you would be required to respond to, but it is it allows us to know whether or not the program's being effective and should continue into the future.
I think we might have different perspectives if we knew, oh, the program would be dropped if that weren't implemented. I'm guessing all of us, because our goal is to.
I think there's other ways to gauge whether. Yeah. There's other ways to gauge whether or not the program is successful. I don't think there's a contingency on gathering that data. We could continue with a survey similar to what we asked last time, which was, has a stipend program lower barriers to you participating? Has it helped to offset expenses that's allowed you to be able to give your time and talent as volunteers to the city?
I think it's helpful that the city if the city is able to, I think it would be helpful to collect data and information to understand if the committees that are serving to support city council are representative of our city. I think that would be helpful. And I think as part of that understanding, what portion of that group is taking the stipend and using it so that we know that it's successfully being used and all the things. The caveat I would put on that is that the survey would be anonymous, completely 100% anonymous, so that anyone who wishes to provide information knows that they're, through however they do that it's not tied back to them, because certainly over the last decade, that's become a concern. And then also that it remains optional. So if it's anonymous and optional and you're trying to get a sense of whether or not all of our committees and commissions are represented in the city, I think that's very helpful.
I would just second Jeff's suggestion. Makes sense to me. But yeah, I wouldn't want to divulge diversity information attached to my name. And I'm not sure if that would give you effective information anyway. So.
Can I offer one thing from over here? I'm just listening. I will say that going forward, if there is collection of information, making it optional is, it's almost a given.
Yep.
That's a no-brainer, I think. I will say that on anonymity, I think what that means can be a little bit subjective. There are different layers. There's at the back end of the back end of the back end of the back end of all of these electronic gizmo things. There's somebody who can see stuff. So I would say as we go forward, like if there is data collection, like we need to think hard about what anonymity means. I mean, not having to enter your name is one thing, but I mean, there are, I guess, degrees or layers of anonymity that I think do not necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. So I think as a city, if we collect data and that's a recommendation from HREC or an assumption of participants in this optional data collection survey, we need to think really carefully to make sure that that expectation is met, or if it can't, and there are qualifiers to communicate that to people. And maybe that sounded obtuse, but I think anonymity is sometimes a harder thing to guarantee than people think it is. But yes, I think, and then I'd say an anonymized random data set is what we would be looking for.
Right. And would likely not even connect the individual to the committee that they're serving on. So there are definitely ways that we can do it. So taking into account the insights and perspectives of the commission, Ian's comments, any additional thoughts on how to move this forward? We can also put a pin in this one, go through the rest of our questions, and then come back to it.
Honestly, I like the anonymity as much as we can achieve, because there's also the piece around like, I mean, I'm used to being the only like native box, right? And so there's like automatically, if that were checked, it's like, here I am, that's me. And so like via those things, you can't achieve anonymity. But making it optional and focusing on, does this prevent or help address a barrier, right? Like all those pieces. Yeah.
If I mean, thanks for saying that. I was thinking about not any particular person or identity, but I was thinking about the fact that we only have, we have 8 active advisory bodies. You know, the collective roster, there just aren't that many people. So I think if we go forward with collecting this data, we as the organizer have to be conscious of that. I don't know how that will impact participation or not, but we're not talking about thousands of people.
It also very much depends on how the data is presented. So the data can be collected and an individual can identify several things, but if the data is then presented as we have this many percentage of people of this ethnicity and this many percentage of people responded this way, you can't actually tell which people of which ethnicity respond to which things in which way. How the data is presented, stored, and created, then there is still some level of anonymity in terms of how that data is portrayed and given. And that just things to be thoughtful about.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm hearing discomfort with collecting diversity information through a survey. I'm also hearing value in collecting that optionally across the board to help indicate whether or not this program is working towards achieving the outcomes.
Again, so how, and dependent upon how it's collected,
Correct.
stored,
So,
and presented and used.
and I'm going to look to Cassandra and Andres over here. What if we, as we're getting closer to when we would conduct the survey, that we'll be asking about the effectiveness of the stipend program, say 6 months out, coming back to this group with some sample questions to go over it at that point to see what questions you would like to include in there. We could look at diversity questions that may focus on things outside of demographic information. We could include it in, but again, we could have a second conversation that would really look at what we wanted to ask and how we wanted to ask it, with some clear vision for how that will be used and reported back out. Does that sound? Okay, great. Next question. So currently the stipend program is focused on standing advisory bodies. Should it be expanded to those ad hoc advisory bodies, such as the group that was working on the tree code?
How do they come to be on the committee?
So, and Ian, Mayor, jump in if I don't articulate this correctly. There were some that were appointed to the committee because of expertise. There were also volunteers who raised their hand and said, yes, I want to be part of this committee. They are all volunteers. They have met a number of times over the last few months. It's a pretty significant commitment.
And we're looking at item 2, the ad hoc committee question.
Correct.
Yeah, and I probably could have covered this. We've got our permanent committees in the code, including HREC, and there are sort of project-specific committees. Like the city is looking at doing a big thing. We're going to get a community member committee with interested parties and some experts and different voices together for 6 months or a year to work on this project. And then when the project is done, the committee goes poof and goes away. Currently, those groups are not eligible for this stipend, but should they be?
Yes, they should be considered.
Yeah, Commissioner Jeff Kitchens, I think that anyone being asked by the city on a standing basis to provide advice, whether they be on a committee that is permanent or ad hoc, since, I mean, we ourselves are only on certain terms, you know, not permanently appointed. So in that regard, anyone being asked to do this on a regular basis should be afforded the same opportunity, and then encourages more members of the public to get involved. And I don't know that we want to get into the world of prioritizing one project or another, one issue over another, when they all can impact our citizens. So it strikes me that the ad hoc shouldn't be an issue.
This is Linda. I'm going to force myself into getting into that habit. Commissioner Linda Long, I would like to remind us gently that we have a limited amount of time left and a bunch of really important information to still cover. So if there's another way that we can go ahead and like answer these quickly or just kind of put them off.
Yep. We can,
Cameron, she, her, I concur that it should be expanded to ad hoc. And I also concur because I am very anxious to get to the 6-month forecast.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate all this, but I also wonder if we could table that so we can get to.
Yeah, I'm quite worried about time. This is Linda.
okay, maybe we can move through these really quickly.
Sure.
So show of hands, who supports expanding to ad hoc committees? Right. Oh, are you able to?
Christopher, raise your hand if you're in agreement. Yes.
All right. Reimbursement options. So currently it's prepaid cards. We've heard there's some challenges around that. Is there interest in expanding those to include direct deposit for those who would like it and are comfortable sharing banking information to allow that to happen? So again, you would have both options. So,
And hard copy check.
and hard copy check
Yes.
as an option. So it's expanding the options.
Christopher,
All right.
yes, no? Raise your hand. Yes, raise your hand.
Okay. Next question is around how frequently they should be distributed. Currently, it's monthly. There were suggestions by this group that we should offer quarterly. It's probably, for administrative reasons, it's one or the other. Curious, those who feel it should stay monthly.
Christopher says yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Why don't I'll follow up on that one to look at the general cadence and see if they might need to be more frequent. All right. And then finally on the outreach, these were some of the areas that were identified. We are planning to move forward with expanding information on the stipend program, the website, in outreach materials, on the application, and in interviews. If you have additional thoughts on that, share that with Andres and Cassandra and they'll pass it on.
Stephanie,
well
this is-
as-
sorry, this is Cassandra. Would it be possible that if commissioners, in addition to the votes that they've provided this evening for you, can I provide your email address to them if they have
Absolutely.
any supplemental questions or considerations in the interim between the presentation to city council?
Yep, happy to. All right, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate your engaging feedback on this matter. It's important. All right, so next up, Andres Portela, City of Bend Equity and Inclusion Director. And you're gonna forecast anticipated work for HREC weekend. Excited to hear it.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. Andres Portela, pronoun he, him, Equity and Inclusion Director. I am a brown man with black hair, black curly hair, wearing a blue sweater. What I'm going to do is truncate this in 3 conversation because I want this to be an interactive process for you to be able to ask questions. So this is going to be part 1 of 3, but I want to start this conversation off with saying we did some things last year and it's super important that we celebrate our wins. This is a non-exhaustive list. Cassandra, next one. A non-exhaustive list. So we had the stipends conversation. We talked about transportation utility fees. We talked about the camping code. We did some welcoming week events. I wish I would have thrown some photos in here because they were absolutely beautiful and it was great to have you in those spaces. We worked on the shared definition of equity in which we're starting to embed in our work as city staff. We started to collect resources for discrimination that was subcommittee led, and that's going to be the main part of our conversation this evening. We did the council policy on discretionary funds. We came and updated you on that. Sponsorship and community programs, services and events, that's the policy number. And there are much more wins. So whoop, whoop, we did that. Moving forward from there, let's talk about our work plan. And so these were the main 3, and you heard Ian talk about it a little bit earlier. But these are 3 main ones: co-create and report reporting tool for community members to safely record acts of discrimination, bias, or hate that occur within the city of Bend. In addition, victims of discriminatory conduct will be provided with resources, community support, and other options for enforcement. In the conversation I'm going to have with you right now, we know that there were some barriers to that. I think Ian talks about it in his, there was some trepidation about including that in the code. And we learned that pretty quickly, but we definitely went through not all exhaustive resources to get us where we're at. And so we're gonna talk about that in a second. Develop an equity framework to be utilized by all city departments in all stages of policy development and decision-making processes. We're gonna talk about that next meeting. The reason why I separated them out is because these are extremely important and we're taking a very tactical approach to touching each one of these. Advise City Council on DEIA related decisions. They face collaborative governance. And so moving on from here, these are our main 3 that we focus on. But for this conversation, we'll focus on those reporting tools. And so as we saw, as we see fairly often, and there's in the presentation I gave when I first got here, there are folks in our community that experience acts of discrimination, acts of harm actively throughout the community, and it doesn't fall under the purview of the law. It is a bias incident, not a bias crime, and there's very clear distinction that was given to us during that first presentation, and in that there was nothing that we could figure out what to do for the bias incident side. And so the solution that was offered was for HREC to figure out how as a community can we share in creating resources, being able to navigate and give appropriate triage to those folks who are impacted by these situations. And there were some limitations. Those limitations that we got through after creating those resources with that subcommittee were public records. Everything we collect is subject to public records. And then re-aggravation of harm. So pushing from one authority to another. And so in next one, we had this. We had, I think we've all seen this before. We talked about how we wanted to have someone who is experienced discrimination go through the City of Bend website or hotline. Discrimination has no place in our community, having it be bilingual, talking about how do we advise, whether it's putting it through the formal channels or to making sure there were a list of community partners, and that it required the City of Bend to house a lot of that information. And again, one of those limitations was public records. Just imagine if if I had experienced a bias incident and I was coming to the city of Bend to seek assistance, but I didn't want everyone to know that I experienced it, someone could hypothetically come to the city of Bend and say, "Can I have that information?" And we would have to turn over all that information to them. There's a formalized process. I know I'm going to look at Ian when I say that. I know there's a formalized process, but it ultimately created a space where we couldn't protect the individual. And so all of these resources, there was amazing resources and amazing work done by Manoj, Stephen, Cassandra, and that subcommittee on creating those resources, and those will still stand. But what I'm going to show you in just a few seconds is the next step of this. And hopefully, I'm going to make an ask. I'm not going to ask anyone to volunteer to be a part of this tonight, but it's really the next step of this work. So next slide. Oh, I think I kind of went into the yellows. And so the suggested solution is leadership with HREC is important. So suggested solution, leadership with HREC is important. So we want to take a multi-jurisdictional approach. And this is to create a repository. This is also to work with our nonprofit partners on making sure that if someone experiences acts of discrimination or hate, we can get them the proper triage. We don't believe that it should sit within the city of Bend because of open records and also that we're going to have to push them to other spaces. So it should sit with a group outside of the city of Bend that can ultimately provide that level of assistance, but also can work between multiple jurisdictions. Parks is separate, county is separate. All of these folks are not necessarily having conversations. So beginning in March, we are going to start that conversation. And the timeline looks like engaging stakeholders and formalizing a coalition structure. Month 3 through 4, we draft and adopt a joint resolution. So we're going to say we're all going to work together. And I'm so sorry that the text is so small. The part of that is creating a formalized reporting process. Month 5 through 8, we're going to develop and disseminate resources. So the City of Bend website is still going to be a space where you can look at additional resources. But then as a coalition, we're going to conduct community education and outreach activities. Month 9 through 12, we're going to finalize a regional safety plan. I think we talked about this when I first came on board of creating those safety plans for sponsorship programs, and then also making sure if there's a city-sponsored event, we have the safety plan in place, but making sure that we implement and monitor and evaluate these mechanisms. So what I'm asking for is an HREC representative to help us with this coalition. Next slide, please. Key components of this. We got to formulate, we have to create the coalition. We have to engage with representatives from adjacent jurisdictions and ask them to participate. We're going to do regularly standing meetings and then create those shared repository of resources, but also create those levels of coordination. The joint resolution, and hopefully we get to come back with this in the next few months, that joint resolution that says, within these jurisdictions, hate has no space in our area. And so we're really going to be affirming our commitment to diversity and inclusion. We're going to seek approval from all of the jurisdictions and then do a formalized adoption process. Part 3 is a formal process for reporting and addressing incidents. And so creating that formalized process as we asked for from HREC. That was a core part of what we asked for, was a formalized process. And so we're going to create that in this space and then create some protocols around handling and responding to these reports in a timely manner. And then making sure we have that confidentiality and protect the person who's been affected. And then additionally, creating those resources, and that's really where we're going to rely on HREC, is creating those resources and sharing those resources. So compiling it, disseminating it, as we've already started, and making sure there's a robust community education, and then also facilitate sharing best practices and successful intervention for strategies amongst coalition members. No worries, guys. I am almost done, and then we'll close out the agenda. And then lastly, community education. This may not be lastly, but community education, regional safety plan, communication and collaboration. This is what we'll position to the collaborative and the coalition, is making sure these 7 points are the core bit of our work. but ATREC played an extreme part of getting us to the point where we found out here's our limitations. And where we're trying to go from here is maybe we did need to look outside of just the city of Bend and making sure that we have the appropriate resources and making sure that we have the right fit to make sure people get resources for that harm. But then additionally, we want to keep ATREC engaged to report back to this body, and also making sure that they have, we adequately resource the resources. And so there's a lot of work between all ATREC, City of Bend staff, and this coalition. And that's what I have to present tonight is we are starting this coalition to further this part of the work. This would not have been possible without ATREC saying, here's the resources that we've collected. Let's start the triage process. We then talked to our attorneys and team and said, hold up, it's not going to be safe for those affected. And then here's where we're going next. And so hopefully we do not need someone to say right now that they want to be that liaison from ATREC. But it would be extremely important to have someone from ATREC helping guide that work with the jurisdictions. I'll pause for questions. Jeff.
I'm gonna make a recommendation.
Okay.
'Cause we're at 6:30. First recommendation is it's extremely important information. We need a lot more than 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And this looks like incredibly great work and we need to go at it slower.
Yeah.
So let's push this entire portion, including what you just shared, so we can maybe review it again to March and have the opportunity to review it ahead of time, digest it a little, and then be able to come and have a good conversation, because the work that's put into this needs to be honored and we don't want to rush it. My other piece to this is that the election portion, if we're going to have elections next month, the process that we've had in the past, as I understand it, is we have nominations, people get a chance to get prepared, and then they do that, which we haven't done tonight. So we'll probably be looking at doing that portion in March and then actually doing elections in April, I'm assuming, or somehow. So it seems to me we've got some really big things: elections, a 6-month forecast, and we are definitely a group that likes to talk. So my recommendation is we take March, whatever other fun things the world wants to share with us, maybe hit the pause button on that. Come back and honor the work that Stephanie's done and make sure we complete that. Take this on and take on our at least getting prep for elections, whether or not we can have them in April. And give ourselves the breathing room and the pressure release valve to give each of those individual things in March the time they're due, and then focus on elections in April. That's my recommendation right now. And not put anything else on the agenda. But those 3 things, because those 3 things will take the entire potential 2 hours. And I'm sure we can find other things to talk about.
Andres, I would just like to say, this is Linda. That, you know what, you had me, and I think you had us at 6-month plan. And with all, we know, we all, I think, know that every word you said was impactful. It was clearly defined. It is so exciting. And I, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th, Jeff, about taking our time to consume it, consider it, realize what's at stake, and move forward with caution and clarity and a commitment to actually get the work done in a careful, thoughtful manner.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we're happy to have you. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, committed.
Groovy.
So-
I Andres Portela, I very much so appreciate that from both of you. The recommendation is received. I don't know if that needs to be a formalized process. I think as staff, we can take that and say, we will move those 3 things to the next agenda. Giving it space to breathe is super important, and I appreciate the feedback on that. So yeah, we can, I think that's
It's
doable.
what you've said is, this is Linda. I think I got the habit. It takes me 2 or 3 times, but what this is the heart and soul of HREC. It's why we're all sitting here for $40 a month. And it's why some of us are sitting here and not using the $40 a month. All right. And so it's not even about that. It's about what you said. It's the love of the work. It's the care and concern for our fellow Bendites. It's trying to build a community that is truly about making a space for love and not hate. I personally see it in my apartment, my affordable housing units complex every day. And so this work is just super important. Let's slow down and do it right and sort of get rid of the dust. And we are so out of time. I know everybody's hungry. I know I am. So we can, Cassandra, pass through the rest of this and set it over and maybe tighten our attention to really our true goal set. Sounds
Linda,
good?
Yeah, Linda, do you just want to read the final sentence with adjourning?
You bet. Yeah. So with that said, is there any other HREC business that we have to do tonight? We're in overtime. So with no other further business, HREC's commission for the meeting for February 28th, 2024. Hybrid meeting is adjourned at, oh my goodness, 6:37.